Bismillahir-Rahmanir-Rahim. Intesar-e-Wilayat Ch-13. Address number 13. The lesson of Karbala. O Nasareen Wali-ul-Asr, I have continued my discussion on the subject that Karbala is a school of Nusra for everyone individually. Nusra of Wali-ul-Asr is true religion, and every character in it serves as a teacher. Whether a character is a friend or an enemy definitely gives some lessons. Friends, it's a fact that just as truth teaches a lesson, falsehood also teaches a lesson. Just as the traveler of the path of truthfulness is an eternal living teaching, so the misguided man also gives an instructive lesson. It is a well-known fact about a scholar who was asked where he got his wisdom from. He replied that he had got his wisdom from the fools. Doing precisely the opposite of what the fools do is the only secret of his wisdom. Friends, a person falling into the pit is a lesson for those coming after him to avoid it. In the same way, every character of Karbala is a living lesson till the day of judgment, whether the character is a friend or an enemy of the sacred family. But only those who are determined to improve themselves can learn from these characters. And if a person does not wish to follow the right path after correcting himself, then nothing is instructive for such a person. It's a bitter fact that everybody cannot recover himself after stumbling. When one acquires consciousness after stumbling, this is due to the grace of his holy master, and a chapter of good fortune opens on him. Friends, when a person intends to travel in the right direction, the first thing to do is to recognize the correct direction. Because if a person does not know the right direction, how he can travel on it? And it is also a fact that the true and the only direction of the path of truth is Wali-ul-Asr. That's why we have been ordained to get the knowledge of our Wali-ul-Asr, as is a well-known hadith. That is, he who dies without the knowledge of the Imam of the age is as if he died of unintelligence or absence of wisdom and disbelief. Friends, there is a considerable difference between the word ignorance and unintelligence. Knowledge is the antithesis of ignorance, while wisdom is the antithesis of unintelligence or absence of wisdom. Ignorance is unawareness, which is less punishable, and unintelligence is a denial, and everything is done knowingly and practically. Therefore, there is no scope for reducing his punishment. Unintelligence is interpreted as disbelief because it involves denial. Friends, the question arises as to what is unintelligence or absence of wisdom. I suggest you consider it realistically. If all the infidel Arabs suffered from unintelligence or absence of wisdom, or today all the infidels of Hind are the victims of unintelligence or absence of wisdom. So, can we mean that all of them were rationally deprived? Does unintelligence mean madness? Were all Hindus and ancient pagans and dualists or Trinitarians insane? Were they ignorant of everything? Friends, there was no such thing, rather they were very wise. Not only that, among them were scholars and also intellectuals. They could tell if it was a male or female by looking at the footprints of the animal on the ground. Is she pregnant or has just given birth? If it is female, they could even tell how much mature the pregnancy might be. These people were second to none in astrology and priesthood. The calendar of the constellations and planets that they had made had also been accepted by the modern age, and today's idolaters are great scholars of the modern age. We see that there are many Hindus in India who have won the Nobel Prize. We find great philosophers, intellectuals, scientists, and champions of morality and thinkers among them. Just think whether Mahatma Gandhi's mental balance was not right. Was Nehru crazy? Were Tagore and Frog insane? If Swami was illiterate and ignorant? In the same way, you will find great scholars of all walks of life among the infidels. These examples would be enough to prove that infidels are not insane and their mental balance is not disturbed. Now the question arises here, if unintelligence or absence of wisdom does not mean mental disturbance, then what does unintelligence mean? Friends, if we look at the matter from another angle, we come to know that it is one thing to be an expert in knowledge, but it is entirely a different thing to have cognition with the real understanding of knowledge. Let me explain here that the definition of cognition and unintelligence or absence of wisdom are different in Sharia, mysticism, and spirituality. In various sciences, the word cognition is used as a term and its definition undergoes a change in every case. Knowledge of deeds is such a science that deals with human behavior. This knowledge is separate from knowledge of practice. Here is the definition of cognition in terms of knowledge of deeds. Cognition is the name of the attitude that a person adopts according to the status of a familiar or well-known person. According to the very knowledge of deeds, here is the definition of unintelligence or absence of wisdom. Unintelligence or absence of wisdom is the name of an attitude that is adopted without considering the status of the familiar or well-known person. In other words, absence of wisdom is the name of misbehaving with the familiar ones. Now, if we look at the disbelievers of Makkah or the ancient and modern disbelievers and polytheists, we come to know that they were not insane. In fact, they did not behave properly with their well-known beings like 1. Allah Almighty, 2. Their prophets, 3. Wali-ul-Asr of their ages respectively, 4. Their attributions. They did not give the required reverence to Allah Almighty, the Exalted One, which was to be given at any cost. Sometimes they tried to encircle Him in idol. At another time, they abandoned the means of discernment or wisdom of monotheism as prescribed by Allah Almighty and made idols as a means between the Creator and the creatures. And sometimes they started obeying self-made representatives instead of God's representatives. They denied the true representatives of Allah Almighty and treated them badly and even persecuted them. And even if they believed in the true messengers of Allah, they would be contemptuous of their attributes. As Sakina's coffin was once placed on Mazbala, that is, a heap of rubbish, and was thus insulted, and even the gate of Hatta was insulted, it has now become clear that having an inappropriate attitude toward the sacred ones is called unintelligence or absence of wisdom, which is disbelief. The ancient infidels knew everything, but they did not care about the holy places and ranks as ordained by Allah Almighty. They knew one God very well, but unfortunately, their behavior was by no means correct. As Allah Almighty has said, you should ask these people, who created this universe? So they will answer that the universe has been created by Allah Almighty. They all knew that the universe was created by Allah, the Exalted One, but their dealing and behavior were faulty, so eternal hell came upon all of them. Friends, as you know, cognition is the name of behavior, while unintelligence or absence of wisdom is the name of misbehavior. In other words, unintelligence or absence of wisdom is the name of not giving protocol to a familiar and well-known person according to his rank. In other words, giving an imam the status of a common man and making and declare an imam a layman are both the acts of unintelligence or absence of wisdom. Friends, there are two aspects of unintelligence or absence of wisdom. In other words, there are two forms of belief. 1. Belief in falsehood and believing of falsehood to be true. 2. Recognizing truth and the people of truth as false. Apparently, these two cases look alike and the crime seems to have the same intensity, and obviously the consequence also seems to be the same. But one of the two crimes is more serious than the other, because believing falsehood to be true is not as great a crime as believing truth to be false. Honoring other than Allah is not as great a crime as, God forbids, disgracing Allah Almighty. In the same way, honoring a non-prophet as a prophet is not as great a crime as disgracing a true prophet. Similarly, honoring a false imam is not as great a crime as, God forbids, disgracing the righteous imam. Friends, honor for non-prophet and true prophets can go hand in hand, as some sects within the Islamic nation made their prophets and gave them the status of perfect prophets, and also maintained the reverence of Sarwar-e-Kaunain, the Holy Prophet. But one case is that they did not make their prophet, but let it be the fate of the enemies. They did disgrace the last prophet, like Salman Rushdie and other so-called Muslims and non-Muslims. That's why Qadianis have been declared infidels, but they have not been declared obligatory to kill. They have made a new prophet, but they have not given any blasphemous idea about the Holy Prophet, nor did they speak ill of him. Because along with entertaining falsehood as truth, respect for truth can also remain. But after believing the truth to be false, the truth is no longer respected, so blasphemy is the greatest crime. Friends, when we analyze cognition, we see three layers of the process of cognition. 1. A mystic who keeps cognizance. 2. Well-known, one should be known. 3. Cognition. Cognition is actually a relationship between a mystic and a well-known. That's why respectable mystics say that in fact there are two aspects of cognition. One aspect is related to a mystic and the other aspect is concerned with the familiar or well-known. The relationship with the well-known is associated with its status. Whether a familiar or well-known is inferior or superior, he has his place and status which claims his discernment. As a patient status is that of a patient, an officer status is that of an officer, and an honor status is that of an honor. That is, the real status requires its discernment, not of its being. The other aspect of cognition has to do with mystic. The relationship of a mystic with cognition is to treat the familiar or well-known being according to his status. In other words, dealing with someone according to his status is called cognition, which is not just knowing, because there are bad people in good clothes and there are ignorant people in the form of scholars. Similarly, there are thugs in the dress of nobles and officers in plain clothes. Contrary to this, in the guise of the ignorant, there are mystics, in the guise of madmen, there are wise men, and in the guise of lunatics, there are sellers of paradise. Friends, the real thing is to know the real status of the well-known person and to treat him in the same way. That is, if we know the status of an officer but do not treat him according to his status, then it is of no use for us to know him. This proves that cognition is not that we know someone's particulars, but cognition is actually about treating the well-known, taking into consideration his rank and status. I often repeat a hadith of Amir-e-Kainat. "O man, the animals you own have your discernment, but you do not have the cognition of your master." If we consider this wise saying, we will find that animals do not know how much about us. They may not even know our name. They are not familiar with our lineage, the ability to perform, status, office, etc. But still they are called our mystics exclusively because they consider us as their masters and they have with us the same behavior that should be maintained with the masters. Even though they know that we are the slaughterers of their forefathers, they love us and sacrifice everything for us. It proves that gathering information about someone's name, caste, lineage, and knowledge of intellectual and mental abilities and powers is not considered cognition, but in fact, it is the attitude we have towards our acquaintances. When we consider someone to be patient, we adopt a specific attitude towards him. And if we treat the patient like a healthy person, do not take care of his illness, and even do not relax him from his work, it is as if we did not consider him a patient. Friends, the aspect of cognition that is connected with the mystic is the practical aspect of him. And the aspect of cognition that is connected with the well-known is the aspect of status instead of being. In fact, the mystic must consider the status of the well-known first and then treat him accordingly. If the attitude is not right, then there is no cognition or deeper understanding at all. That's why we have been given this command, that is, whoever died without the knowledge of the Imam of his time, he died of unintelligence or absence of wisdom and disbelief. It means we must first discover the status of the Imam of our time, with whom we have got a relationship, and then treat him according to his status. Friends, Imam of every age is in fact Wali-ul-Asr, who is called the immediate God, and his status among us is like that of Allah Almighty, the Exalted One. He is the Vicegerent of Allah Almighty. Suppose if Allah were present before us, what would be our attitude towards Him? What protocol do we give to Allah Almighty? The protocol we want to give to Allah, the Exalted One, is the protocol we have to give to the Imam of our time, because he is the eyes of Allah Almighty, the reason of Allah Almighty, the side of Allah Almighty, and the hand of Allah Almighty. That is, if every part of his body is related to Allah, then he must be given the same protocol. And this type of protocol can only be established after cognition or deeper understanding. Friends, you know very well that many people of our time know who is the Imam of our time, but their dealings with their Imam are not fair. That's why their death has been declared the death of unintelligence or total ignorance and disbelief. Just think for a moment that the Emperor of the age appears and emerges. Those confronting him, will they not know who the Imam is? Those who will be standing in front of and confronting Imam of the age and giving these voices, "O the beloved son of the Queen of the worlds, go back to where you came from. We don't need you." Do these people not know that he is the Imam of our age? If anyone objects to this narrative, we can quote an example from Karbala as to who among the opponents did not know that Karbala was the son of the Holy Prophet. They all knew him well, but the introduction and deeper understanding did not even benefit them at all, because it is behavior towards the well-known person which really matters. Friends, now we present the same thing in another way. We have all listened to the Hadith, and often we listen to it and recite it to each other. If we have ever thought that the knowledge of the Imam of the age is intended to be self-serving or intended for something else, that is, cognition is the real goal, or this cognition is a means to achieve another goal. Friends, the fact is that cognition is not the real goal in itself, but through the cognizance of the Imam of the age, Allah Almighty wants to take something from us which is in fact divine purpose. I would like to add here that the word knowing and recognizing are two separate words. Knowing is very limited to a superficial introduction, and there is a great deal of depth in recognizing. Similarly, there is a difference between knowledge and discernment or wisdom. It would be like to say, although the word introduction and cognition are taken from the same source, but there is a big difference between them. Cognition creates different feelings. For example, if a person meets a stranger who tells his name and address, it becomes a stranger's introduction. But when we discloses that he is the deputy commissioner of the same district, then this introduction has a very different effect on man. When a man sees a particular plant, He likes it, approaches it, and asks for its name. On being asked, another man tells him that it is a man-eating plant, and a new kind of feeling emerges from within. A man saves his life of a drowning man and bestows favors on him. Then comes the introduction. His name is so and so. He is the resident of a certain place. The name of his father is so and so, and he belongs to a certain family. But in the end, he finds out that the person who saved his life is also the commander, which leaves a profound effect on him. This proves that out of many well-known statuses, it is necessary to know the one which is the greatest one, so that a positive attitude is maintained accordingly. And among the innumerable positions of our famous emperor of the time, the greatest one is that of his being Wali-ul-Asr. It is the perfect representation of Allah Almighty. That is, we must know who is the vicegerent of Allah Almighty in our time. Everyone understands that the attitude towards the deputy is the same as the attitude towards his master. That's why he has taught us to have the same attitude towards Allah's deputy, that is Wali-ul-Asr, as he has towards his master, that is Allah Almighty. It means Allah is everything for Wali-ul-Asr, and Wali-ul-Asr is everything for all living creatures, including human beings. This means that we must first know his specific status, which is directly related to our being. Friends, after having discernment or cognition, we will come to know who the person in front of us is. Obviously, as his status is known, his position will be known. With the knowledge of his high position, the importance of his edicts or commandments and rulings will also be realized. And when the greatness and importance of the rules are known along with the high office and status, then it will be followed accordingly. If the high office and status are known, then obedience and compliance will also be according to that high office. This means that a positive role will be played in the introduction and dealing. If obedience and commandments are considered insignificant despite a detailed introduction and deeper understanding, then it is the absence of wisdom or sheer unintelligence and disbelief. Friends, we both know and believe in Allah, but it has nothing to do with Him Almighty. Allah does not observe what we believe in Him. He only sees how much we obey His commands. In the same way, the Emperor of the age does not see what we believe in him, but he does see how far we obey his commands. It is also a fact that who does not believe in the holy sayings of Wali-ul-Asr, how can he believe in his sacred being? That's why the cognition or deeper understanding of Imam of the age is very important. That's why the cognition or the deeper knowledge of the Imam of his age is so important that whoever does not know the Imam of his time, his death is called the death of disbelief and total ignorance or absence of wisdom. Because if there is cognition or deeper understanding, it will lead to humility. Only discernment will lead to nusra, and it will also lead to obedience. Cognition will persuade us to accept sorrow with sorrow and joy with joy. Cognition will teach love. It will also teach befriending and shunning. Cognition teaches how to exercise rights. Cognition will teach humility and a true sense of worship. In short, cognition is the very basis of the whole divine system. Friends, the fact is that there are hundreds of aspects of cognition that persuade a man to a well-known being in one way or the other. These very aspects motivate a man to love and obey the well-known being. But the aspect that is the first and foremost and produces instant love in the heart is discernment of beneficence. When it is known about someone that he is our benefactor and he has done us such and such a favor, then man immediately inclines towards him and he falls in love with his benefactor. In the past, if a man was a sun worshipper, fire worshipper, and nature worshipper, he was driven by his natural willingness to do so, because he thought that their crops, gardens, weather, and rain are due to the sun. That's why he used to worship the sun. In the same way, seeing the benefits of fire, he used to worship it in return for its kindness. And Moses was ordained to cultivate his love in the hearts of the people. Moses said, "O my Creator, love is a passion that cannot be cultivated. You kindly tell me how to cultivate this spirit of love." Allah says, "You just explain our benevolence to them. Our love will automatically arise in their hearts." In fact, the first thing that creates a space in the heart of man is no doubt discernment of beneficence. Because man is a servant of kindness, that is, man naturally loves his benefactor. Let us look at one of the lessons from Karbala. The day is Ashura, that is 10th of Muharram, and the time is after the sun's decline. Karbala has blessed earth by sitting on it. 1,950 are those very wounds that both his friends and enemies are seeing with their bare eyes. And no one can see the deep wounds inside the heart except his chaste and veiled members of the family. All the masters of history write, when Karbala adorned the earth, he was in possession of the entire universe for 3 moments. And even a single particle of the whole universe was not out of his occupancy. When holding the whole universe in possession, not even a single enemy dared come near him. When these 3 moments passed, so at that time, the accursed Ummah was given respite again. Then the accursed Umarsad shouted at the army, "Martyr the Imam quickly, because the Friday prayers are being delayed." After that, 9 killers came in turn, but no one could martyr the Imam. Some saw Karbala as the emperor of the Prophet, and some saw him as the commander of the universe, due to which all the killers kept returning. One out of the killers has been mentioned without referring to his name. They narrate that on the day of Ashura, the 10th of Muharram, when Imam Pak came to Karbala, Umar ibn Sa'd, the accursed one, called a young man from the army and said, "If you go to Karbala and separate his divine head from his sacred body, we will reward you." That young man came to Karbala with a dagger in his hand. Karbala looked at him and saw that he was a handsome young man who had approached him with a dagger. At that time, Karbala looked at him and said, "How did you come here?" The young man said, "I have come to martyr you." Karbala said, "What a handsome young man you are. Save your youth from the fire of hell and do not take part in my killing." The young man asked, "Do you want to avoid being martyred?" Karbala said, "I do not want to avoid being martyred, because if you do not martyr me, someone else will do it. But I want to save you from hell and your youth from the fire of hell." The young man thought for a moment and asked, "O my master, are you still worried about my salvation? Even in this extreme persecution, we are more concerned about sinners like me than yourself. If there can be such a benefactor like you, who is more concerned about others even in such critical moments?" Saying this, he immediately repented and asked, "O my master, kindly do me another favor and allow me to offer Nusra." As soon as he was allowed to offer Nusra, he threw his dagger at the ground and drew his sword from his sheath. While brandishing his sword with a new spirit, he approached the Syrian army, which had gathered to witness the martyrdom. Umar ibn Sa'd, the accursed one, said to the young man, "Why did you not martyr him?" The young man replied, "I have now recognized the truth, and more than that, I have recognized my benefactor. Now I will not dare martyr my master, rather I will send you to hell." Friends, this young man attacked the accursed Ibn Sa'd. Because this young man was on foot and the accursed Ibn Sa'd and his accomplices were on horses, Ibn Sa'd's henchmen attacked the young man. So the young man showed the essence of the sword with great courage and fought in such a dedicated way that one after another horseman fell to the ground, and he was heading towards the accursed Ibn Sa'd. And during jihad, he was also reciting some verses. O excited youth, be courageous and do some good to your benefactor. O excited youth, you must dare because there is very little time left. Heaven is a few steps away, but there are many thorns along the way. Take courage, O excited youth, and remove all the thorns in your path. The beloved son of the Holy Prophet has obliged me and explained the difference between truth and falsehood. O excited youth, sacrifice yourself quickly for the beloved son of the chaste mother. The whole caravan has already moved far away from you to its destination. O excited youth, do not delay and try to meet this caravan. Every Nasr of the Holy Prophet of Allah and only you had survived. O excited youth, do not waste your time on useless and baseless tricks and arguments. Many old men overcame this ordeal, and I, despite being hale, healthy, and young, was left behind. O excited youth, be courageous, otherwise self-condemnation will eat me up. I have to sacrifice you with great pride at my master's feet. O excited youth, be courageous and become a bride applying henna of blood. My centuries thirsty soul, be courageous lest you should die of thirst. O excited youth, be courageous because the river of mercy is flowing. Get ready for the day when Ja'far's heir is to bless the world with his arrival. O excited youth, be courageous. Today is the day of training. This young man was wielding a sword, reciting verses and offering Nusra at the same time. He offered Nusra with such a strong will that Karbala praised him for every blow. As he fell to the ground with fatal wounds, he looked at Karbala and said, O my master, if you have approved my little Nusra, and if you have considered my martyrdom as your Nusra, at that time, Karbala prayed for him, and finally the young man, while being martyred, placed his head in the lap of the Holy Prophet. Friends, the conclusion to be drawn from this story is that if a person's conscience is alive, the thing that persuades him to offer Nusra is kindness. And man considers sacrificing his life for his benefactor as his first and foremost duty. And if he does not do so, he is considered ungrateful and unobliging. Friends, the Wali-ul-Asr is the greatest benefactor of his time. And the Wali-ul-Asr of our time is also our great benefactor. Survival of our lives is totally dependent on him, and our health and safety are just because of his benignity or generosity. Friends, this proves that the entire universe gets its sustenance from the blessings of his souls, that is, shoes. Now, should we still think about how we ought to treat such a benefactor and what type of attitude we ought to adopt towards him? If we behave like this young man, the consequence will be the same as achieved by the young man. If we behave like other Syrians and Kufis, then there is nothing to save us from eternal hell. And there is no such power in this universe that may deliver the accursed ones from the curse of Allah Almighty and His kingdom. Finally, it is our prayer that our great benefactor may bestow his great favor on their loved ones by awarding them the awareness of their kindness. And let's be grateful to him for his great benevolence, keeping a positive attitude towards this pure and chaste being, and finally preparing us for the nusra of what is true and just. Ameen. Ya Rabbul Alameen. Alhamdulillah wa shukra sahib az-zaman. Ajjalallahu farajahu sharif.